Hello, and welcome to episode 72 of Adult Music, the podcast with music for the mature mind. And Mike, I think there's a Spanish breeze blowing through here today.
Wasn't there a Brazilian breeze just last week? What's going on here?
I don't know.
But yeah, we got a lot of Spanish speaking. There's no real vocals on any of these. Well, one or two of them have a vocal, but it's all like Spanish language tinged. I'm a great believer that music comes from language. So I think that a lot of like your sense of language gets into the music that you write. You know, say if you're from a certain place, for example. I think it really depends on what time in history you're coming from and what the style is, I guess. But
I believe that
there's a lot of truth to that. Yeah.
And I often say that as a trumpet player, Latin players have different articulation because they use their tongues differently for speaking language. So they can do some different kind of techniques there too.
They get a different sound. That's pretty cool.
Anyway, we've got some old world and new world, a little Spanish and a little Portuguese influence, all mixed up with lots of interesting music tonight.
Yeah, the old world's got a lot of new music coming out of it. That's pretty cool.
An interesting little journey here. Well, I introduced Mike over there on that mic. I'm Russ over here.
That's Russ. Yeah, I should have returned the comment there like we do here in Japan when we pour each other's drinks. And I guess I was thinking only of myself as usual.
No crime in that.
Let me just say, that is Russ over there.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, by the way, you should give a shout out to the entire population of Greece who have written to us this week. What's going on over there?
Yeah, thankfully all of the Greek jazz musicians have shared our podcast and seems to have made the rounds on Facebook. So we've got a lot of downloads from Greece. So thanks to Spiral Trio for sharing our little discussion of their recording and made it through the community. So we appreciate that.
Yeah, I really appreciate that myself. It was really nice to read all those. Just you can almost feel the enthusiasm coming off the print. It was really nice.
Yeah, it's very nice. And now we know what to listen for, and learned a little bit about the Athens jazz scene. So we'll keep looking there for new releases, and it's kind of exciting.
I'll do what I can in classical music, but it's there isn't that much that gets released over here. Right. So and you got to kind of snatch them up when they show up. So. Yeah.
And so if we got any new listeners out there this week, we usually go through 6 releases, usually 3 classical and 3 jazz, sometimes things that don't fit into categories so neatly, a little world music, something a little funkier. But for all the music that we're going to talk about tonight, in the episode description, you can find links to Spotify and Apple Music if you want to check them out on streaming. Or if you'd like to get them all in one place, there's also the full episode playlist that is on Deezer, our preferred streaming platform, and you can get everything in one long list every week. And I put that up soon for the next week after we get the episode up, so you can listen to it before the episode if you like. I can also listen to the podcast there on Deezer if you like to. They have podcasts now. Just look us up, Adult Music Podcast. And if you can't see the full description or those links on whatever app or platform you listen to us on, because we're on pretty much everything now, you can always come over to our host site, which is Podbean, podbean.com, and all the links and everything is easy to follow for all of our past episodes too. If you enjoy the podcast, please do follow or subscribe on whatever app or platform you listen to us on. And if you take a moment to give us a ranking or write a short review, that helps us get listed in the browsing category recommendations. That helps us get more listeners, which makes us happy. And you can also find us at Facebook too. Leave a message or comment there. I'm putting up a lot more new recordings and other interesting little things during the week.
Yeah, Russ is doing that. I got to start doing that. I'll have more free time soon, so I'll be doing
you had some
a lot more
interesting
myself,
classical stuff last week.
Yeah, I did have that this weekend.
Yeah.
But I should have put these up because these were pretty interesting recordings. They're a little unusual, actually.
Yeah. Otherwise, if you want to get in contact with us directly by email, adultmusicpodcast, all one word, @gmail.com. Get in touch. I'll be sure to reply.
Yeah. All right. So I guess are we ready to go? We're going to take a trip to Iberia and the Americas too, the Central and South America to be precise. I guess we like those warmer climes at this time of year. We were in Greece one week, and then we were in Brazil another week. Although I wasn't really, with the music, and now we're all Spain, Portugal, and various countries in Latin America.
Yeah, in
these assorted programs that we've got here. All right. Well, I was just thinking this week, Jill Biden, the president of the United States' wife, gave a speech. I think she was in Texas when she gave it. But she said that Latin people are as diverse as breakfast tacos or something like that, which I thought was the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. And she rightly got pushed back for that. What she should have said, and what we're pretty much going to say on this episode, because we are, of course, more sensible and we write our own speeches, is that Latin people, or just in general, are as diverse as the music you're going to hear on this pod, or that we're going to talk about on this podcast tonight, and that you're going to hear if you click the links that we include on this program. There was some pretty interesting music here. A lot of composers you probably haven't heard of before. There are some of them I hadn't heard of before, like the first one we're going to mention on this first album here. Let's start in Europe. You ready?
I'm ready.
All right. So this first album is called Iberian Impressions. Kind of sounds like a jazz title, doesn't it? But it's not. Don't be fooled. It's a classical album. The pianist. It's Spanish and Portuguese piano works, all from Europe in this particular album, and the pianist is Paulo Oliveira, and this is on the Odradek Records label, a label I've never heard of before, but I'm starting to notice some releases from them on the sites that I look at. Yes,
I think the Spiral Trio was on Odradek.
Oh, were they?
Yeah, so they do jazz too.
I'll have to look into that a little bit more. I think I seem to recall that was the case. Wow. Okay. Anyway, Iberian Impressions. Let's be impressed with Iberia. You ready? The first work on this album is by a composer I hadn't heard of before, Armando José Fernandes. He's Portuguese, and he lived from 1906 to 1983. So, a 20th century composer. Now, part of the reason you probably haven't heard of, unless you're Portuguese, I guess, that you haven't heard of these composers is because they wrote mostly tonal idiom in a time where atonalism, 12-tone music, dodecaphonic music just became the required style of writing in art music. While that was happening, people were still writing in the tonal romantic style, but that music wasn't being played, or at least was only being played, by the composer's friends or in places, their hometown or whatever. So the nice thing about having recordings and being alive now is that we're finally getting to hear a lot of this music, because it's just sort of, musicians want to discover new music, and it's always been there, and some of it's really great. All right, let me tell you a little bit about Armando José Fernandes. He spent most of his life in Lisbon, in Portugal, except for a spell in Paris where he studied with giants, really, like Nadia Boulanger, who pretty much educated everyone who was great in the 20th century, right up to Astor Piazzolla, one of her last students. Paul Dukas, Paul Dukas, who wrote The Sorcerer's Apprentice, which many listeners will remember as the piece that was featured in the movie Fantasia with Mickey Mouse as the Sorcerer's Apprentice, kind of bringing the brooms to life to do his cleaning for him. That, by the way, if you know that piece from the movie, you should probably listen to the actual version, because they manipulated it a bit for the movie so that the animation would fit. They sort of changed it. Okay. He studied with Jean-Roger Dukas and Alfred Cortot, one of the great pianists of the 20th century. Very influential on a lot of pianists, but especially the French piano style of the 20th century. Okay, Fernandez's music is introspective. He's thought of as neoclassical. I think that's probably right. This piece is called Sonatina, written in 1941. That year should send up some flags there because that was the war year. Okay, so Europe was at war at this time. All right. It's actually a pretty nice piece, really. It doesn't really sound troubled or anything like that. It opens with radiant chords, and it's kind of an impressionistic piece. The first thing I noticed about this it wasn't the piece itself, but the recording. I think it draws attention to itself. The piano sound is very, very dry. Okay, it's like you're wandering in the desert there. Okay. You might want to have a glass of water with you when you listen to this. Like it's recorded in his bedroom on a small piano or something. Like just, I don't know. It's in a room that just gets no room sound at all. I don't know how they recorded this. But that said, it comes up detailed, which is nice. You're just not getting this really nice dimensional piano sound. Oliveira, though, shapes the piece very well. He has a genuine feeling for it and all the rest of the music on this album, so it's recommended for that. We get a clear sense of the work's form. The notes say it's impressionistic. I really wouldn't call this impressionistic in any like pastel type of way. I guess it's impressionistic in the sense that it's got like a Spanish flavor to it. You know, it's got those eighth note descending endings to phrasing that we're so familiar with, like in Spanish music, da-da-da, you know, that kind of thing. And it's easy on the ear, very appealing. Oliveira has a fluid technique, and balance of the different voices is clearly audible, especially in this very dry acoustic. It's a short movement. Of course, it's called sonatina, so it's a small sonata. The second movement is Tempo di Folia. A folia refers to La Folia, which is a chord progression that was used. It's said to be ancient. I should have researched this a little bit more, but it was used a lot in Baroque music. You see it pop up in a lot of Baroque works, and it's a chord progression that people solo over. It's apparently also a melody, but in the Baroque music, composers will use the chord progression to kind of write their own sort of material over, and that's what happens here, I think. It's been used in compositions since the Middle Ages, so it's pretty old. This theme here is played and repeated, but reharmonized in the bass and extended the second time. Here, you're hearing more, and you're not really hearing a Baroque style, which is when I think Folia, I think the Baroque era, because they used it a lot. But here it's very romantic sounding, like the 19th century, which is interesting if you've heard a lot of Baroque takes on it. This actually sounds like pretty complex to what I've heard of the Folia in the Baroque music, and it ends inconclusively, I guess just on the last chord and the melody doesn't end or something. Third movement, Allegro non troppo. This is an intricate and tonally ambiguous movement, and it's also pretty charming. The notes say, spiky and dense, ending with soft subtlety. It's got sort of a contrapuntal opening with angular melodic ideas. When I say that, what I mean is it's not making this curvy song-like melody. It's kind of more like figures, you know, that kind of thing. The main melodic line moves between the various voices, and it's a very brief movement, 1 minute and 37 seconds. I felt like this piece was over as soon as it started. You know, yeah. I was kind of like, oh, blink and you'll miss it. It was pretty appealing though, but it was you kind of wanted it to be a little more filled out, I think. It's hard to give an impression of what it was like just because it was so short. It's appealing, easy to listen to. It seemed pretty light, and given its title, there's nothing wrong with that. Okay, now we get onto one of the giants of the late Romantic, early Modernist era, Isaac Albéniz. He was Spanish, and he's most famous for his gigantic set of piano works, Iberia, which there's a new recording of. We might have to do one day. That's 2 hours long, though. This is a shorter set of sort of pieces that are characteristic of the Spanish music he was hearing around him, called España, written in 1890, before Iberia, his magnum opus. These are a little shorter and a little more modest. How many of these are there? Let's see, there are 6 of them. The first one is a preludio, which has a very Spanish feel. Now, I've heard Iberia many times, so I was sort of expecting that. This isn't as richly orchestrated as that is orchestrated, meaning like there aren't as many voices going on the piano. It's odd to hear this in this very dry acoustic, because I'm just used to hearing it in other ways. But the familiar harmonies soon take one's ear off of the overall sound of the piano. There's pedal used, and you can tell when it's being used, but the individual notes don't blur at all because the acoustic is so dry. As in the first work, Oliveira's playing is fluent and excellent. The Spanish feeling comes across, and this is always good. This is why you often want a Spanish pianist in Spanish music, because they get that feel really in a genuine way. It just sounds natural. Alicia De La Rocha was a pianist who was fantastic at this. And in fact, she's recorded this work, and I have her performance of it in my head from long ago. So like really nothing's going to compare to that. It's one of those definitive performances that no one's going to overtake, as is her recording of Iberia. But I keep listening to these newer ones just to find new details that I might have missed. So that's a fairly brief preludio. The second movement is a tango, and say more sunny than sultry. I would agree. This is a pretty sunny work. It almost seems like a barcarolle, just with the way the arpeggios and the bass sort of roll. But Oliveira plays with a light touch and a light Spanish character. It sounds. We associate the tango with Argentina, but this sounds very Spanish to me. I guess it originated in Spain. I don't really know much about that either. Third movement, Malagueña. This is a type of Andalusian flamenco music, and it's a dance. Oliveira gets the dance quality across. Did I say that right? My New York accent? Dance!
Sounds good to me.
All right. It's a very light step. I kind of think of Malagueña as being more heavier than this. It's very light here, though. Which brings me to Oliveira's style of playing. He plays all of these pieces very lightly. He's got a very light touch. It's sort of an aristocratic sort of style. Like he's not going to get into any of these vulgar emotions or anything like that. It's very classical, very clean. If you want to be a little mean, you could say antiseptic. But I would say it's more geared towards the form. And he's more classical than anything than romantic, I think, even though he does put the romantic elements across, just not with any of this gushing emotion. So that's what you're going to get. You're going to get something a little more aristocratic sounding on this album. Some pianists I wrote here would use a heavier touch to get a more full-blooded quality, but Oliveira doesn't do that. He's more intellect than emotion, I said. That shouldn't put people off, though. Sometimes you just lack the vocabulary for this. It doesn't mean it doesn't have emotion. It does. It's just light and more focused on the form, I would say. Let's see. The Spanish character is there, but it's like faded color in a photograph. You kind of feel like if some, really passionate pianist really got this, it'd be in full color more, okay? So it feels kind of, again, not in any bad way. Again, we think of faded color as being maybe a bad thing, but you just feel like there's more of, there's something lacking in that dimension. There's certainly nothing lacking in the actual melodic playing and the recognition of the form and putting the work across. All right, I hope people are getting a good impression of this, because that's what I want to give. All right. Serenata, fourth movement, which means an evening song. By the way, a little quiz out there. Does anyone know a serenata would be an evening song? Does anyone know what a morning song would be? Write to us, and we'll tell you the answer next week. Okay. Because there were songs that you would wake up your honey with by standing under her window with your mandolin as people threw flower pots at you for waking them up too. Anyway, this serenade is not a typical serenade, but its animated undercurrent has a suggestive, seductive quality that would surely win over its intended audience. To me, though, it didn't sound... That's what the booklet notes say. To me, it didn't sound much like a serenade. It sounds a little too playful for that. I always think of a serenade as wooing women under their window kind of thing, which was sort of a Latin European tradition at one time.
Have you tried that yourself?
I have not, but apparently it continued in Naples, Italy, up until the early 20th century.
Could be the missing element,
Yeah. Okay. There are a lot of quicksilver changes in the character that Oliveira does really well to put across. You really hear his kind of his response to the different characters, the fleeting characters this piece goes through. He plays with a light touch throughout. And again, like in the previous movements too, you don't get a sense of him digging to the bottom of the key. He's very light. He's got a very light touch. The fifth movement, Capricio Catalan. This starts out as a simple lullaby type theme. And it sort of passes like a rondo, or a rondo, I should say, with the lullaby as the rondo theme. The capriccio parts, a capriccio is sort of like a playfulness or a joke. So if you get a pizza that's a capricciosa, it means like the guy just went, hey, just put anything you wanted on there, basically. It's just capricious. It's just like a spur of the moment sort of a mood that you give, rise to. That's what it means. So the capriccio parts are the contrasting episodes between the main theme. So basically what he feels at the moment he's written down, I guess. And they're a little more lively than the lullaby. It's a pretty straightforward performance. When I think of a capricciosa like pizza, I just think of somebody like the other guy saying, "Oh, it's a capricciosa." Hey, he's just throwing ingredients all over the place. Whatever lands on lands on the pizza is what you get. All right, the sixth movement, Zico's dance rhythm. It lightly skips along, almost like a Spanish-sounding Baroque piece here. Oliveira has a light touch in all of his playing so far, as I've mentioned before, and the form is put across well, with Oliveira making sure we hear all the cadences. And I wrote this whole thing about how, I've got Alicia De La Rocha on my in my mind here, but this is a very different performance that she put across. Oliveira is very classical in his interpretations. Now, it's nice that we heard this familiar piece, because now we understand a bit about Oliveira's approach, and we're going to hear all this unfamiliar music now, and we know he's going to go for the more classical sound. All right, the next composer, we have three pieces by Pedro Blanco. He was born in León in Spain and studied piano in Madrid, but his career took him to Porto in Portugal, so he's kind of bridges the two countries here. He lived in Porto from 1903 until his death in 1919. What happened in 1919? Well, he died in the post-World War I flu pandemic.
Oh.
So he's got something in common with us, I guess. Not that he died, but he lived through a pandemic. Well, he didn't live through it. That's the tragedy. Anyway, the first work here is called Castilla Opus 16, and it's a multi-movement work. We hear only the second movement, Nana Leonesa. This starts out with a rippling piano figuration, and it figures throughout this piece. The piece is constructed with chords outlining a rather churchy-sounding theme between the dancing figuration. Oliveira actually puts out a bit more passion than previously in this track. Listen, for example, from the 2-minute mark on. The piece builds towards cadences that it doesn't reach. Instead, the contrasting section will butt in and take over. It's got an interesting ending where the middle pedal is held down so that individual notes will ring after Oliveira lets go of the chords. You don't hear that middle pedal used very often. No. It's a shame. It's kind of a nice effect. Anyway, on to the next piece. Pedro Blanco again. Romantique. This is French. Opus 6, the fifth movement is Berceuse, which means lullaby. This has a pretty right-hand figuration. This is a multi-movement work too, but we're only hearing one movement of it, the fifth movement. It's got some pretty right-hand figuration. It's an arpeggiated set of thirds, while the theme is played in the left hand. A new theme, mainly solo, begins after about a minute, and this section leads to a very sensitive cadence around 1 minute and 40 seconds, then continues on in its spacious, intimately whispering vein. The form is ternary from... that means ABA, so you're going to hear a repeat of the opening section at the end. From 2 minutes and 57 seconds on, we go back to the opening A section. It's a very pretty work. Do you think your child would fall asleep listening to this, were you to have a child? I'm not so sure. It's nice, I guess.
It's light and gentle. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. I always kind of think about that.
But the next one will wake him
listening
up.
to a berceuse. Yeah, there you go. Pedro Blanco again. This is from his set of works called Galerías, Opus 10. This is the third piece called Verbena. It's which is an open air fair or festivity, and we get that sense from the writing here. It's a dancey piece in 4/4 with 2 beats played as triplets and two as pairs of eighths to get the Spanish feel across. That's at least how I interpreted it. I didn't see a score. By the end of the first minute, the figuration gets pretty dense, and Oliveira expertly separates the various melodies via levels of volume with his hands. This really does show you who the pros are, people, pianists who can do this. There's quite a bit of passion in this piece, and you can tell Oliveira is really feeling it. He seems to have a special affinity for Blanco's music. All 3 of these works come across very well. As always, he keeps the formal line of the composition in sight and guides us unerringly to the end, only this time with some virtuosic flourishes. The Blanco works are the most fully realized on this album so far. Next, a composer that... let me just say something about him. José Viana da Mota. He's Portuguese. Lived from 1868 to 1948. So he's the end of the Romantic, and really most of his career, I guess, is in the modernist era. This is called Tres, or how do you say? Tres Cenas Portuguesas. I don't know how to say this in Portuguese. Opus 9. From 1904. Now, I know Viana da Mota's music from only one album that Hyperion put out. He features in their massive Romantic Piano Concerto series, which is now up to its 84th CD.
Wow.
They started in the 90s. And there's one disc in that set, in that series, played by Artur Pizarro, the great Spanish pianist. He played the José Viana da Mota piano concertos. And hearing this piece made me go back to that. I'll talk about that in a minute, but let me get to this piece first. So it's called Tres Cenas Portuguesas. 3 Cenas Portuguesas. I don't know how to say that in Portuguese. Viana da Mota actually had some pretty impressive teachers, too. He studied with Hans von Bülow and taught Sequeira Costa, who was the teacher of Paulo Oliveira, the pianist we're hearing on this album. So he's got a 2-generation connection to Viana da Mota. Viana da Mota, incidentally, was one of Franz Liszt's last students. Yeah, so, and by the way, anyone who played the piano and was alive in Europe during Liszt's lifetime studied with Liszt. He basically just got in a big room and taught everybody. He didn't have private students. So when they say that, keep that in mind. Okay, so there are 3 of these. The first one is Cantiga D'amour, which is a love song. This is mostly graceful and coy, according to the notes. Coy isn't really a word that I use much. But gives way to something more complex and ardent. Very strong Spanish feel to this, in both melody and rhythm. The piece actually has a music box quality, given Oliveira's sound and the style of playing here. So it's mechanical in a light, appealing way, sort of nostalgic, I guess. He's very idiomatic in this piece, is Oliveira, the pianist. Clearly the composer is someone he holds in high esteem. There's a nice change to the minor for the darker, heavier middle section, which still maintains that Iberian feel. The second movement is called Chula, and this is a percussive Portuguese folk dance dating back at least to the 18th century. The folk dance melody and rhythm characterize the entire piece. The bass rhythm in open fifths, which always kind of suggests the countryside because it has that bagpipe kind of feeling to it. It's an immediately appealing piece, and Oliveros captures the feeling via what is obviously a deep understanding of the idiom. And the third movement, Valsa Capricciosa, Capricious Waltz. Hey, oh! The Capricciosa is the key word here. It's a waltz with a lot of odd pauses and melodic figures falling over the waltz rhythm like so much extra frosting on a cake. There are a few unexpected key changes during some of the figurations, so that's capricious sort of behavior or writing as well. It's an entertaining piece, again, well put across. These pieces, I really liked them, and it made me want to go back to the piano concertos on Hyperion that Artur Pizarro had recorded, and so I listened to those, and they were nothing like these. They're very romantic, very straightforward. There's really no kind of Portuguese or Spanish character to them at all. They're really very just romantic sounding without any real national feeling to them. So very different than this. Anyway, check them out if you're interested. That's the second place to go. Okay, tracks 16 to 18, Xavier Montsalvage, Spanish, lived in 1912 to 2002. He was actually alive the first time I heard his music, which is kind of interesting for me. This is another sonatine, and so we begin and end this album with a sonatine. This is the last work on the album. This one's called Sonatin Por Yvette. There were apparently a lot of Yvettes in Spain, because Albanese had an Yvette too that he wrote a piece for. I personally don't know anyone named Yvette, but maybe they're in my future. Who knows? Okay, so Montsalvage was a Catalan composer, and he sought to free himself from regional accents and Andalusian flavors. He's trying to get away from what Albanese set up. He was interested in 12-tone techniques and Wagner, but this gave way to the influence of Olivier Messiaen and Georges Auric, both French composers. Also, well, Messiaen's music is pretty difficult. Auric wrote a lot of film music, actually, in the early days of film. He was also drawn to Cuban music. Sonatin for Yvette blends diatonic melodies that evoke nursery rhymes or children's games with sliding chromatic triads in the left hand and propulsive syncopation. The result is vividly colorful in a way that reveals Messiaen's influence in particular. Well, maybe. Certainly not his harmony. I'm guessing Yvette is a child. Anyway, first movement, Vivo Espiritozo. This starts out with a cascading figure. It descends and stops, and a more traditional theme is laid out. The cascading material, which is a kind of a structural element in the piece, it kind of links a lot of the music you're going to hear together. It comes back and brings momentum to a halt with a gradual pause. The movement is a bit whimsical with some unexpected interjections. We get a cadence and a new section at 1 minute and 40 seconds, and the movement briefly changes character for about a quarter of a minute just before the 3-minute mark. We don't get a full recapitulation, but hear the familiar cascading figures and theme at the end. Second movement, Moderato molto. This is very dreamlike and starts with a descending figure followed by chords. The repeating ostinato chords are more haunting than dreamlike to me, coming across like church bells in a cemetery. That's the impression I got from this performance. The movement seems ominous, really. This is kind of a heavy dream, I would think. By the end of the second minute, we get a mood change, something dark and heavy, rather than ominous. By 3 minutes and 39 seconds, we're back, and the opening repeated chord ends on an ominous chord that fades. The third movement, Allegretto, so we're quickly out of that kind of heavier mood, is quick, and it quotes Mozart's "Ah, vous dirai-je, maman," which in English is "Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star." Okay, but the French title, if you want to look at it, translates to something like in New York English, "I'm telling you, Mom." Okay, or something like that. Let me tell you, Mom. That's what it means. All right, and it's got there are words to it too. It's like a French, folk song. All right, it's good humored, complete contrast to the middle movement with quick scale work skittering all over the keyboard and even a big glissando. Excuse me. The quote happens at just past the 30-second mark. I mean, you can't miss it. Everybody knows Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. By the 1 minute and 30-second mark, you hear all elements, including the quote, combined together. Good composing and excellent playing here by Oliveira, and ends on a generous and witty cadence. So in sum, I liked this album enough. I would have preferred interpretations that were less light and more full-bodied, but I can't complain about this. This is the first time hearing most of these works, and I'm getting a good sense of the musicality of them from this recording. The recording itself prevents the sound from leaping out of the speakers, like they stay, kind of inside the speaker, like they're a kind of speaker wallpaper. It's kind of like listening to this is kind of like looking at a painting hanging on a wall, rather than looking at, say, a three-dimensional sculpture. Okay, that has that Z-axis. You don't get any sense of the dimensionality of Oliveira's sounds, if assuming it's there. Nevertheless, the performances are idiomatic, and this is a good way to discover these works, I would say. And keep them in mind. You might hear other pianists play them too. Anyway, Oliveira is an excellent pianist. He's very aristocratic in his approach, and I liked it.
Yeah, I like this one too. There's a lot of variety here.
Yeah,
with the different
absolutely.
Spanish dance feels in the various movements, and I like the programming a lot too. Fernandez's first work is kind of sparse arranging, not a lot of voicings going on in the piano, and like you said, you notice the kind of dry sound more in that piece. But as the program progresses, things get a little bit more interesting harmonically, and especially I really enjoyed
you adjust to the sound, to be honest.
Yeah. And I like the Blanco pieces a lot.
Yeah, I like them
Those
too.
are really nice performances, a little more emotional and colorful. And then things get a little bit more modern in terms of the harmonies and technical towards the end. So I thought it was a real good ordering of the works. And most of these I hadn't heard before. And I enjoyed it. Really interesting.
Yeah, me too.
Spanish piano music.
Yeah, good way to discover some unknown composers, unknown Spanish and Portuguese composers. All right, for the middle here, we're going to move into Latin America. This is an album called Corazón, the music of Latin America. And this is played by, this is cello and piano. The cellist is John Henry Crawford from Louisiana, USA.
Wow.
And Victor Santiago Asuncion, who's a Philippine-American, is the on the piano. And then there's a guitarist, too, who goes by the name of Jiji, Jiji, all capitals. And we don't know where she's from. The notes don't tell us much about her. This is on the Orchid Classics label. Now, you might wonder what this American dude is doing playing all this Latin American music. Well, it turns out that he, for some competition or some thing, he visited Mexico, and while he was down there, he heard all this Mexican music and really took to it and started studying it. Now he's made this album of all this Latin American music, and it's nice that he did, because we don't hear, again, a lot of this. And I'm going to have something to say about some of that, because some of these composers are fairly well known. And some of them, though they're well known, their music doesn't get played often. Maybe it does in Latin America itself, but even in the United States, you don't hear enough of it. It's sort of like, well, let me get to that. Anyway, let's just start listening here, or talking about these pieces. The first is by Leo Brouwer, who's Cuban and who's a contemporary composer. He's very old now, but he's still with us. This is called Canción de Cuna, and it's a berceuse, a lullaby. It's based on the Drum Negrita by the Cuban composer and pianist Eliseo Granet. I don't know, 1893 to 1950. This piece starts with a pizzicato cello rhythm. It's kind of, I kind of wish I could have seen this performance. I can't tell if this is a pizzicato cello or a muted guitar. I'm pretty sure it's a pizzicato cello. It sounds pretty big. Then a bowed melody over arpeggiated guitar chords by Jiji. She's on the first track. One of the nice things about this album is that the accompaniment is going to alternate between guitar and piano, so it keeps the ear engaged. This piece by Brouwer has a lovely melody, instantly memorable, which Crawford shapes sensitively. This sets a good mood for what's to follow, because we're going to hear a lot of very memorable melodies on this album. He's really puts together an album of what the French would call bonbons, these little musical sweets. So anyway, the first piece is warm and appealing. The second is by Heitor Villa-Lobos, the Brazilian composer. He was a 20th century composer, and he wrote a lot of music. He has like over 200 opus numbers and seemed to never stop composing. And his music was heard quite a bit in the U.S. This particular piece is called O Canto do Cisne Negro, W122, for those of you who are into catalog numbers, which means Song of the Black Swan. This is adapted from Villa-Lobos' symphonic poem Naufragio de Cleonicos in 1916, so it's a section of a larger work. This one has arpeggio spray from the piano, so very light, gossamer spray of arpeggios, harp-like, as the cello plays the wide, generous melody. The entire piano part is arpeggiated chords, and it sounds rather challenging. Especially to keep time while the cello is playing. Santiago Asuncion gets a beautiful gossamer sound for Crawford to play over. There are some interesting chord changes. The cello really gets all the attention here. And it ends with repeating gentle chords on the piano that do a natural fade. Third piece is Carlos Guastavino. He's Argentinian. And this is called the Pampa Mapa. Anytime you hear a reference to the Pampas, you know you're in Argentinian territory. Pampas are the plains of Argentina. Map of the Plains is what this title means. Guastavino's music has almost always communicated a national feeling, and this was originally a song, this piece. It starts out rather raucously on the piano, which pounds out rhythmic chords, and it calms for the cello's singing line, which plays in between these chord rhythms. A sudden loud piano chord ends the piece. Next is a composer that I really like and I want to hear more of, and he's probably Mexico's most famous composer. This is Manuel Ponce. To Mexico, he's really what Aaron Copland was, anyway, to the United States. Now, again, America and Mexico both are deeply musical cultures. Okay, so they have a lot of popular music. There's a whole tradition of sort of national music, and then there's like art music. Manuel Ponce would be their most well-known classical music composer. This piece is called Portimi Corazon, and Ponce was keen to reunite the concert world with Mexican folklore and traditional songs, and Mexico has a lot of those, as is evident in this piece. Atmospheric piano melody and chords start this out and set up the cello's melody line as though he were a singer. Indeed, this melody is very song-like, and Crawford plays it as though he were singing it. He has a nice sense of the ebb and flow of the melody, and really of a song's melody. It's gorgeous and instantly memorable. All right, next, Alberto Gizmonti, who I kind of know from his recordings on the ECM label in the 1970s. Check those out. This piece is called Agua Evino, which is the name of an Alberto Gizmonti album. Gizmonti is I hope I'm saying that right, Gizmonti? I'm not sure. But he was a guitarist. He is a guitarist. He's still alive. And this is from a song from the album of the same name. Jiji is accompanying on guitar. This starts with Pizzicati again. Crawford plays the melody as the guitar gently accompanies. At 1 minute and 10 seconds, the entire texture changes as the guitar solos and the cello accompanies with pizzicato arpeggios. Jiji's playing here is very pretty and appealing. After this, we get back to the opening section, so this is an ABA form. Okay, back to the Mexican composer Manuel Ponce. This is called Estrellita, his most famous piece. This is arranged by Jiji and Jascha Heifetz. One imagines they didn't arrange it together. Anyway, Ponce's most famous work here, Heifetz popularized it, which is why it's so famous. And one can hear why, too. It's got a gorgeous, heartfelt melody, played sensitively here by Crawford with guitar accompaniment, and the melody is romantic and warm. If you don't know it, it's kind of one of those tunes you should just know. So listen to that. Track 7, Astor Piazzolla. We're back in Argentina. Le Grand Tango, 1982. This piece was written for Mstislav Rostropovich. This passionate piece combines tango rhythms with jazz syncopation. Please, there's no jazz rhythm. It's just the syncopation. This is the first prolonged work on this album at 11 minutes long. It starts out with a marked tango rhythm. Piano is accompanying on this piece, and it sounds louder than everything else on the album so far. You might want to keep an eye on that volume knob. There's a quieting down at 40 seconds, and there's a lot happening as we move from brief episode to brief episode. The textural changes register well, usually signaled by a sudden change in volume by the musicians. There's a very dramatic slowing at 3 minutes and 25 seconds, then a pause that leads into the next, less rhythmically marked section. We get back to tango shortly after. Again, the contrasting episodes continue. Each of them is like less than a minute, and they build to the next tango-infused section. Crawford's expression comes from his variety of attacks with the bow here. Sometimes he'll let out a burst of brief tone, then sweetly play the melody. He's got a lot of swooping gestures to play in this piece. That kind of thing. Listen, for example, between the 9 minute and 9 minute and 30 second mark, sliding down to a lower note than the one started on. Santiago Asuncion on the piano is right in the idiom, and good performance. Track 8, Héctor Villa-Lobos is back. Pequeña Suite, which means little suite, from 1913. This is the Melodia movement. We only get one movement. And this piece, it says, reflects Villa-Lobos' love of Bach, although I didn't really get a sense of that. Gentle piano chords open this movement. The cello plays a muted melody, a big contrast from Piazzolla's preceding work. The sensitive melody is catchy and highly appealing, and as we've come to expect at this point in the recording, beautifully shaped. Yeah, Crawford's a cellist that I'm going to have to keep an ear out for. He sounds fantastic. He's very young, too. Okay, ninth track, Héctor Villa-Lobos again, Ondulando, undulating or waves or something. This piece is originally for solo piano. It was written in 1914. The cellist arranged this work to bring out its melodic line. It sits atop the busier accompanying piano figures, and to be honest, I'm really curious to hear the piano version now, because I'm wondering how this melodic line would stand out with this accompaniment. The music reaches a dramatic peak midway through at about the 2 minute mark, with a crescendo to a high note on the cello, which quickly dissipates and goes back to the opening melody played quietly. Okay, so we get next is the big piece on this album, the third we heard here by the composer Manuel Ponce, his sonata, he's the Mexican composer, sonata in G minor for cello and piano. First movement is Allegro Selvaggio, which kind of means wild. And this is more an example of, it says in the notes, Ponce's Latin American modernism. This movement is stormy and surging. There's nothing particularly Latin American sounding about it, or anything in this work. It's a straightforward classical music sonata, though one with a lot of attention-grabbing musical events. It starts with an almost galloping rhythm on the piano, with the cello's melody bursting out on a hard attack. There's a full-bodied sound on the cello. The recording here captures it well. I said fairly well. I would say well. You hear the attack and imagine anything you might be missing. The piano has a lot of room reverb on it, placed slightly back, which is only right in this context. It's very loud. The second theme of this sonata movement is in full contrast with the opening, a sweet, curvy melody that builds in tension at its end to a false cadence, extending the theme and resolving at 2 minutes and 40 seconds. There's a brief coda into the development, which bursts in at 2 minutes and 48 seconds. The musicians play up the dramatic contrast to the hilt in this movement. There's some really sweet dancing moments in the development, such as the material around the 4 minute and 15 second mark. The development is full of incident. It's very inventive. And I missed the start of the recapitulation because I was just so enraptured in the development that I didn't even notice it started. It happens at around the 5 minute and 30 second mark, and it rather surprised me. The second quiet building theme repeats in the tonic key at around 6 minutes and 30 seconds, and there's a gorgeous, quiet close to the movement. Very creative, very eventful, this movement. And there are 3 more to come. The second movement is Allegro, rather surprisingly. Usually you get the slow movement next, but not here. This opens with a lovely rippling sound on the piano with pizzicati on the cello. The piano plays shimmering repeated notes in the middle to high end of the instrument, and this shows Ponce's inventiveness again. We get something more straightforward at the 50-second mark as the theme continues bowed on the cello now, instead of pizzicati. The thematic material is excitable, softening to amiable at times. There's a rather quiet middle section beginning just after the 2-minute mark. The cello pretty much drones low notes in this section, playing minimal melodic material, which draws attention to the piano. At 3 minutes and 30 seconds, the pizzicati and the repeating note thematic material in the piano return at a softer volume and with a gentler profile. Ends with a dramatic flourish. The third movement is an arietta, and this movement, the notes say, links the cello with the human voice. The piano accompaniment is very gentle and supports the indeed song-like cello throughout. The piano's patterns are sort of repeating patterns and occasionally shimmering in its quicker detail. Lovely material all around, very appealing the first time you hear it. Probably the most appealing, immediately appealing movement in this sonata, but actually they're all really interesting. Last movement, Allegro Burlesco. 2 arresting piano chords start this, and then we get a sharply bowed attack on the cello, which plays a theme that it trades off with the piano. A slower section begins at around the 2-minute mark, with the cello playing a melancholy theme. The piano responds at 2 minutes and 31 seconds with something staccato and livelier, and we're back to the opening material. This all gets rather more aggressive by the 4th minute, with the cello bowing bass notes as the piano plays thematic material, then abruptly shifts into a quiet section again, with the cello taking the lead. The cello ends this section with a sharp attack that leads to more upbeat material that leads to the end of the movement and the sonata as a whole. So really a very inventive work, one that I would really urge you classical music fans out there to hear. It's one that should get an outing more often. There's still one more work, Astor Piazzolla's Oblivion from 1982, the same year as the Le Grand Tango. This has a mournful melody. The cello plays a pizzicato bass and it bows, and I think it's multi-tracked. I think this is all him. The booklet notes don't say anything about how this is performed. I'm guessing it's all him multi-tracked, though. There are no other instruments on the track, just lots of cellos.
A huge string ensemble of just cello.
Right. Yeah. He must have spent a lot of time in the studio.
Caramel and chocolate sundae or something,
of cello.
Yeah.
Nothing about this in the booklet notes, and deep tones all the way through. Okay, for me, on this album, Manuel Ponce's sonata, the 4-movement sonata, is the big find. But really, all of this music should be heard. I enjoyed all of the arrangements, and Crawford's playing makes all of this music come up sounding fresh as it should. He really gets the idiom. I was rather impressed by that. These works are rarely heard on recordings these days, so this is one really to snatch up if you're interested in something new. It's a great album for discovering what will be unfamiliar music to most.
Yeah, this is great. I'm a big cello fan. I just love to hear cello. And I don't think I've ever heard this combination of Latin music and cello, which just goes together wonderfully because of the rich melodies. And Crawford's got a really wonderful, warm tone. It's just his instrument, sounds just great. And his playing style, as you say, he's really gotten into the spirit of these compositions. And the arrangements are great, too, with the piano and the guitar and the way that they've got, the accompaniment passing back and forth between the guitar and the cello, both doing sort of little muted things, pizzicati. I was just really drawn into it. It's gorgeous sounding. And then it, finishes off with that kind of shocking all cello thing that you're like, whoa, what am I listening to here? But really interesting works, a lot of things that I hadn't heard before. Very, enjoyable melodic themes all throughout everything. this was a really enjoyable listen.
Yeah. Anyway, so I think that might be my classical recording of the week. The next one, the third and final classical recording of the evening, is Fernando Lopes-Grasa. I haven't heard of him either until now. Okay, he's a Portuguese composer from the 20th century. His years 1906 to 1994. And these are orchestra works by him and one set of solo cello works. These are performed by the Portuguese Symphony Orchestra, conducted by Bruno Borrelhinho, he also plays the solo cello on the solo cello works at the end. So I think this is a project that he is putting across. I think he's the main mover on it. He wants to introduce Lopes-Grasa's music to a wider audience. Anyway, first, we need to know a little bit about this composer. Lopes Grasa was born in Tomar, Portugal, and he was active politically in his life as an anti-fascist, opposing the dictatorship that had started via military coup in Portugal in 1926 and lasted until 1974. His music from 1940 onwards, which is all of the music on this album, intertwines elements of Schoenberg, Stravinsky, and Bartók, along with traditional Portuguese music. Now, I should mention he doesn't sound like any of those composers. Okay, so, but you can hear like the sort of harmonic elements, I guess, at times, but they're fleeting. One of the things that this composer likes to do is, because he's such a 20th century composer, he's using new ideas, and he'll compose in sort of these sort of melodic cells, and you'll hear those cells like repeating like all over, and they'll sort of slowly morph into something else, and you'll have like a longer melody, and he'll avoid a lot of cadences in order to just sort of surprise you or build tension and just get into a new section and things like that. So you're going to want to listen to that. Be prepared not to get any resting time when you listen to this music. Anyway, the first work on this album, I didn't mean Sleepless Nights. No. Anyway, the first work is Divertimento. Divertimento means like just something that's going to divert you. It's fun. It's light. Okay. And this is his Opus 107, written in 1957. It was composed as background music for the Portuguese Pavilion at the 1957 Lausanne National Fair. All seemingly traditional Portuguese elements in these works are by the composer himself, so none of them is taken from Portuguese folk music. The music is predominantly good-humored, but occasionally ironic. There are a lot of unresolved dissonances that result in a constantly shifting tonal context, as I mentioned. And this is the booklet saying this now. A predominant use of anticlimax, instability of rhythm and note values, specific timbral textures, and a fragmentary nature of its musical discourse. Fragmentary is also a good word, because he does tend to compose in fragments that get interrupted. And the first unresolved dissonances in this piece lead to much of the rest, I would say. The first movement is an entrada, entrance music, and sounds almost classical in its dimensions. The recording is clear with a bit of muffling over the brass. They don't quite ring out very brightly. They got like sort of a matte finish to them, let's say. The movement has a kind of toy soldier feeling to it. It's small in scale. It's a bit playful, as the title Divertimento would indicate. The texture suddenly changes at about 2 minutes, but we're quickly back to the opening material. There's a sudden unresolved ending and a long pause between each of these movements, really. By the way, those unresolved endings, get used to them. There are going to be a lot of them. He seems to like that. Anyway, second movement, Recreo Campestre, which means country playground. This composer also seems to like wind instruments a lot. They feature heavily in all of these works, and they start this movement out, with some piquant harmonies thrown in along the way. Ooh, a little spice there. Okay. Sudden change of texture at about the 1 minute mark, where some humorously interrupted phrases are heard. There's a more careful balancing act at minute and 30 seconds to 2 minutes, which gives way to fairground music at about the 2-minute mark. So there's all sorts of like art music being sort of like juxtaposed with sort of fairground music or just music of the masses sort of quality to this, which is sort of characteristic of the 20th century in general. This movement is a kaleidoscope of moods. It's easy enough to keep up with them all when listening. Not when I'm typing this, though, so I didn't really label them all. This is a good example of Lopes-Grasa's unresolved and interrupted cadences in this movement. Third movement, choral, and that title means like a chorale type choral, something sung in church. So it's got chords, and that provides the title. Its wind-led theme, again, is pretty sober sounding, so I'm thinking church here. Lopes-Grasa seems to favor a sudden change of direction around the 1 to 2 minute mark, and this movement provides it at around a minute and 30 seconds with some easy-to-follow melodies spiced with more piquant harmonies. I'm really getting a lot of mileage out of that word this week. Piquant. Look it up. Use it every day. Fourth movement, intermezzo. I'm guessing this is an oboe. I couldn't really tell. Starts with this movement with a long solo statement that comes across as archaic. We hear some brass at a minute or so with some deep brass snarls anchoring the harmony in the bass range. A march develops from all this by around a minute and 50 seconds, but quickly gives way to something else, as is Lopes-Grasa's style. We get back to the opening material, this time harmonized by winds, with a string instrument thrown into the mix providing counterpoint. Fifth movement, fandango, which is, in this case, is a dance. This is a very gentle fandango, played first as short melodic sections. Again, this is a characteristic of Lopes-Grasa's style. The main melodic material repeats often as this movement plays out like a set of reorchestrated variations. The bass drum ending provides some lightness of mood. Sixth movement, ecloga. It would be like an eclogue, which is a pastoral sort of themed poem. In this case, it would be a pastoral themed music with a light melancholy air. Lots of slight departures from the opening material and reorchestrations of music previously heard. Seventh movement is the finale, upbeat tone set by this dominant tonic 1/5 bassoon line, which the winds put an upbeat melody over and turns into something circus-like eventually. There are lots of swooping dissonant phrases in the winds. At a minute and 30 seconds or so, we get a change to something slower. The opening material returns soon enough, and we get some intriguing orchestrations just before the final cadence. So this is a lightish work, but it has a lot to listen to in it. The material constantly changes its sound, never sticks around for long. There are lots of reharmonizations and reorchestrations of material, showing that Lopes-Grasa was a composer with a fertile mind. Tracks 8 to 11, Sinfonietta, Opus 220, written in the year 1980. And this is subtitled Homenagem a Haydn, so the composer Joseph Haydn. And that would suggest something from the classical era, the Mozart-Haydn era. The Haydn element in this work is heard in the lively spirit and transparency and concision of its construction. And it says, as well as the Haydn-sized orchestra. I'll have something to say about that in a minute. Duality of musical styles figures throughout the Sinfonietta. All right, the first movement, Adagio and Allegro Moderato. So these two directions indicate there's an introduction and then a main section. So the introduction starts with winds. It sounds like a bassoon solo, which Lopes-Grasa seems to favor. He likes the winds. We hear them a lot on this album, and this starts with a very non-Haydn sounding intro. It's got Lopes-Grasa's fingerprints all over it. The more strident harmonies are missing, but once the Allegro Moderato main section starts, we can hear a bit of Haydn's fleet style being echoed. To be honest, though, I feel like, given the character of this material, that the conductor is making this section way too much. I feel like it could have been lighter and fleeter. But then again, I'm not conducting it, so I really don't know if that would work. I did enjoy the powerful timpani sound whenever it showed up. The movement comes across as ponderous in this performance, and I don't think it should be. I don't think if he's calling it a homage to Haydn, I don't think this is what Lopes-Grasa intended. Although, given some of the harmony, maybe a slower speed and heavier sound is proper. The heaviness lends drama to the work, and I could very well be reading too much into the dedication. It does seem at times like this movement wants to take off, and it doesn't. But judge for yourself. And suddenly mid-phrase, as that's a Lopes-Grasa fingerprint, I've figured. Second movement, andante, and then più mosso, and then lento. Starts with an ominous funeral march, 1/5 dominant tonic beat on the timpani, as the thematic material plays on the winds. Surprise. That funereal beat transforms into a livelier ticking shortly after, and something more lively. This goes away, as is Lopes-Grasa's way, and goes back to something slower and heavier. It's not a cheerful movement. It's very brief, too. Third movement, Gaio. Now, the title in English would be gay. Means cheerful in this case, but kind of has a connotation in Portuguese of shrewd. The theme is abruptly interrupted by a brief quotation from the trio section of the third movement, Menuetto, of Haydn's 100th Symphony, the Military Symphony. There's a fight for supremacy between the two styles afterwards. Okay, so the harmony, Lopes-Grasa's harmony, seems to get stuck in the A section of this work, and effort is spent to get out of it. So you kind of feel like the harmony sounds like it's like stuck in a ditch and it's kind of trying to rev an engine to sort of get out. And the Haydn quote comes in very clearly at 1 minute and 17 seconds, and we're thrust very suddenly into an elegant candlelit ballroom. It's taken with a decent lilt and completely contrasts with Lopes-Grasa's writing. It's an odd ending to the movement, and it ends mid-phrase. Fourth movement, Allegro con spirito. This is indeed spirited, light, and optimistic. The harmony soon goes astray a bit as darker, more ominous tones creep in, all before the 1 minute mark. The playing gives this movement a big-boned quality. The playing and recording is very pleasant, but a bit on the slow side. Ends with a witty flourish on the cadence. When you see a piece called Sinfonietta, you expect something light, at least I do. And I feel like this work would have been better served if it were played with a lighter sound and fleeter tempo. Again, this is just me putting my opinion on this. You should judge for yourself. This performance gives a work a heaviness that I really don't feel is there. But it does bring out a lot of the piquant harmonies. Okay. Next, we have tracks 12 through 16, Cinco Viejos Romances Portugueses, Opus 98. By the way, sorry for my approximation of pronunciation here. I really don't speak Portuguese. I do love the way it sounds, though. This was composed between 1951 and 1956. All of the thematic material is based on traditional material, possibly of troubadour origin. It does sound very old. These romances were sung by women about women, and that's where they get their titles from. We're just getting orchestrations here. The first movement, or the first of the Cinco Viejos, is a romance de Dona Silvana, has a modal harmony, very warm string orchestration with a floating feeling. It feels almost devout and religious. Some nice high wind harmony just before the minute mark in the background. Something more ominous starts with the timpani in the second minute. The material is mostly played by the winds here, and we get a repeat of the opening material accompanied by timpani this time after the ominous section ends. Second piece, Romance de Santa Catarina. Okay, so we get a saint. Those warm string harmonies from the first work return to introduce this work with a more mobile melodic line in the intro. The main theme is folk-like and taken by the winds, with strings providing harmony. The orchestration here, as in the first work, is big boned when the strings come in and thins out when the winds take over. This particular piece is pretty brief at 2 minutes and 9 seconds. There are some odd rising harmonies at about 1 minute and 25 seconds. Then the opening material repeats and brings the work to a close with the cadence. Third, Romance de Dona Infanta. This is briefer still at 1 minute and 26 seconds. This starts with brass and winds. Strings come in to fill out the texture. It's interesting how Lopes-Grasa likes to give the orchestral sections time by themselves rather than blend them all together. Like you'll hear winds and then you'll hear strings, but you won't always hear them blended together for new colors. It's pretty interesting. It's like he wants these individual primary colors to stand out. We never get far from the opening material in this brief piece. It's very appealing. Romance de Donna Angela follows. This starts with reed instruments, probably oboe, taking the main melody as strings and the rest of the winds accompany. There are some brief descending Spanish eighth note flourishes at the end of phrases. This sticks to the main material, which gets reorchestrated. And the fifth and last of this set, Romance de Santa Iria, is a little more complex than the other works in this set. It features a theme that changes its mood and orchestration each time it's repeated. I'm finally getting, at this point, that Lopes-Grasa is taking the verses of each song and giving them different orchestrations to keep them instrumentally interesting. This ends with a bold, big orchestration. I think I would have liked these... They're very appealing, these pieces, but they're very brief. And I think I would have really gotten more into them if I knew the words or or what these particular songs were about, or what the romance of these women, the story of these women was about. I could probably follow the emotion a bit more easily. Anyway, we end on tracks 17 through 20 with the Quattro Invenções, Opus 148 from 1961, for solo cello. Okay, so Bruno Borralhinho, the conductor, is playing the solo cello here. Lopes-Grasa classified this phase of his compositional life as atonal dramatic expressionism, but don't go running for the door yet. These are pretty appealing pieces. The movements are characterized by developing variation technique based on intervallic cells. So you're going to hear these little phrases that kind of keep being repeated in different areas of the cello to build the entire piece. That's the structure. You can follow that. The first one, marked Allegro, starts off in an appealing way with a strong, big-boned sound on the cello as it plays a staccato theme, followed up by a more legato or higher up in the cello's range. Borralhinho has a light touch, but nevertheless manages to get a big sound out of the instrument when necessary. I think he's pretty closely mic'd as well. He gets enough variety in his sound to keep the listener's interest. Second movement, or the second Invenções, is an andante. Starts out, I should just call them inventions, that's what they are. I mean, he's naming these after Bach. Starts in a more downcast, mournful way, with a heavy sound, lightly bowed from the lower end of the instrument. By the 2-minute mark, this cellular phrase refigures itself so that it climbs high into the instrument's register. We hear this familiar figure throughout the invention, sometimes slowed down, sometimes legato, sometimes staccato. It ends inconclusively, the invention, in the middle of one of these motivic phrases. The third invention is marked vivace and features quick staccato repeating notes in the beginning. The repeated notes are a kind of motif. They briefly disappear for some brief cello flourishes, only to come back. There's a more legato melodic middle section, but it's very brief. It hangs around long enough to set off the two rushing repeated notes sections from each other. Ends on a high staccato note. Fourth invention is marked lento. Double-stopped low notes begin. So this is sort of a big contrast to the third one, which is mostly staccato. Some thematic material emerges from this in the cello's mid-range. At about the 1-minute mark, a sort of pattern is established as the material moves toward the upper range, but stalls out somewhere in the middle. The melody briefly frees itself in the 3rd minute, then the double-stop material returns as the melody sinks back into the lower range. It ends a bit higher up on a sweetened chord. I thought these works were cleverly constructed. You can hear their integrity as they progress in the sort of material that's building them, the repeated little melodic cells. The audibility of the structuring material makes them pieces satisfying. Okay, so all in all, this album is, this composer is a nice discovery. I was interested in the constant searching that Lopes-Grasa engages in all of these compositions without many cadences for resting on. I thought the performances were also very good. I thought, as I said, the Sinfonietta could have been livelier, but the rest of the works seem well done. This is one of those recordings where there's no real template to refer to for the performance of these works, so we only have these to listen to. This is going to act as a reference point to any future recordings. I think Lopes-Grasa's music might be something waiting to be discovered. When I was listening to this, I was pretty aware that this will probably repay repeated listening, and I should probably listen to it a few more times.
Yeah, this was interesting to me. The only thing I didn't care for were the invenzoes at the end. Even though I like cello, much of what drew me to his composing was the really interesting tone colors. Lots of winds, brass and woodwind.
A lot of winds.
And very interesting use of harmony. Kind of fun dissonance, I thought. It's peppered in. Surprises you at some point, but it's usually done in a very kind of playful or interesting way. And as you say, the key centers are constantly moving with those little cells of melody. But it does somehow, the way that he leads from one thing to the next, even there's kind of, like you said, a cellular component to it. It's connected so well with all the changes that it really draws you through the piece and you remain interested, especially in the divertimento. They're usually kind of, light, entertaining pieces, but there's a lot going on compositionally here. Yeah. And I thought it was just really interesting. Held me right through, especially with some of the challenging harmonies and little suspenseful things in there with the timpani and whatnot. And I enjoyed the Sinfonia as well. More interesting harmonies, different kind of playful lines, those same peppered dissonances. Yeah, the romances are kind of short, just when you're getting into them. But they do have a lot of nice changes in tonal colors, too. And then even so, I just, there wasn't that variety of tone colors and whatnot. They're kind of interesting rhythmically and what's being developed. But I really see his charm in the use of the colors of the orchestra. And for that, it's very interesting. I think it'll take a few more listens to get a map of what's going on with all those fragmented things that pop up in there.
I'm thinking his time may have come because the way the music is constantly changing, it seems like it would suit our smartphone generation with our short attention spans, because as everything changes, your mind can just kind of flit along with the music to these new sections. So he might be something for our age. I hope we hear more.
All right. Yeah. I think it's jazz time.
It is jazz time. It's always jazz time, though, really, isn't it?
It sure is. Anyway, we're going to start in Spain for the beginning of the tour with the first two recordings. I'm not sure how to say this musician's name, actually, if it's Jan or Jan Dominic, who's a pianist and composer from Barcelona. And we've got his release that came out in the end of May, the Magical Forest Tour. And it's on Fresh Sound New Talent label, which we've featured a lot of releases from. And he describes this as a set of compositions that narrate a part of an intimate adventure in a magical forest. And he says, which I created with the intention of recovering the freedom lost during the confinement suffered during measures against the COVID pandemic. It is also a revindication of music as expression of freedom. So have a little free romp in the forest here.
Certainly kept us free during the pandemic. Yeah.
So we've got Dominic on piano, who's also the composer of all the works. Victor Carrascosa on trumpet, Marcal Peramon, tenor sax, Juan Pastor, bass, Enric Fuster, drums. And we've got some special guests. The album actually, title says featuring Danny Perez on guitar. He shows up on 4 tracks. Joan Marti, flute. We've got Andrea Motis, the trumpet player and vocalist, getting a lot of attention from Spain. She's just here on vocals on 1 track. And that kind of rounds out the ensemble. We start out with a track called Departure. This one begins with a loping ostinato bass line, opens it up into some pretty piano chords, sounds like some major 7ths and rich kind of harmonies there. Trumpet and sax come in with a breezy melody line, over a kind of Latin beat carried on the cymbals by Fuster. Changes up to a swing section and then back to a kind of final Latin straight beat. So some variety of rhythms going on there. Gets into swing again at the end of the melody into a trumpet solo from Carrascosa. He's got a nice fat tone, a little breath in there up close to the mic. I like the old style kind of articulation that he has. He keeps the swing nice and relaxed even when he's blowing out some of his speedier lines. Paramon is up next for a tenor sax solo. He's also got a nice fat tone, relaxed swing sense that works well here. Then Dominic is next on piano, showing off a nice sense of touch, a lot of clearly articulated high notes in the right hand and punchy left hand accompaniment figures. They go around the melody once more, breezing through the Latin swing change-ups in there. It's a very nice start to the Tour of the Forest. Track 2, Contrast. This one's got a kind of a rubato piano opening with some melancholy chords. A really warm and then soaring high melody comes through from the trumpet with some softer backing from the sax. There's a little bass pulse, but no drums, and then it comes down quietly again for just piano. These must be kind of the start of the contrast, hinted at with the title. Bass and brushed drumming join in for a steady, slow beat, and then Danny Perez joins in on a very clear-toned electric guitar solo with also really clear, picked-out articulation. It slows, comes to a pause around 2 minutes and 40 seconds. Then Perez sets a new groove with some funky guitar picking. The drums and bass join in on that new funky groove, but it changes up to swing and then back again as the horns come in with lines on top. It's swinging really heavily at 3.5 minutes, where Paramon gets a tenor sax solo. He gets some nice raw intensity and a rougher sound in his lines here. Dominic is next on piano, starting rhythmic and bluesy, working up through some cool harmonic ideas to high trills and exciting lines with nice agility. He trades some percussive and fun rolling chords with fills from Fuster on drums, who then gets his own solo, mixing up the cymbals and toms nicely, finishing it up with some tight snare rolls and then kicking it back into another round of the melody. This is a fun tune, and it does have a lot of contrasts indeed. It keeps you going in lots of different directions. Track 3, Avui. This one starts in 6/8 with long horn lines and piano underneath, giving chiming chords to the beat. The next section of horns gets some more motion, and along the way, the meter changes up between 4/4 and 6/8. This will keep you counting, and lots of things changing up there. Carrascosa starts his trumpet solo with some nice agile lines in the 6/8 feel, but it switches up to swing again before long. I like the chances he takes in his solo here. He gets himself into some tight spots harmonically and then finds resolutions. Something we used to hear more of in the 60s with jazz musicians who took lots of chances and made things exciting. I like that. Dominic is next with a nice swinging phrasing in his solo in a more flowing style. Nice rhythmic combinations between his hands. The horns come in behind as he pushes to a climax, and they take it around the tune once more with a little surprise pause at the end. The fourth track is the title track, The Magical Forest Tour. The title track is a rhythmic one. There's a cool groove with gaps in the bass and piano left hand, while the right hand has syncopated chords. Add some horn lines on top and interesting chord changes, and it's an exciting beginning to the tune. Paramon is up first on tenor for a solo. He has some nice outside of the chord licks and gets speedy and raw at the end. Then Perez is up for guitar solo after that. This time he's got a rockier and edgier tone. He surfs over these interesting chord changes nicely, adding a little raunch to the tone at the end. Everything comes down slow and quiet at 3 minutes and 40 seconds or so with soft horn lines. Then just soft piano and tight brushes on the drum remain for a delicate bass solo from Pastor. Then Dominic takes over with the solo of some clear high melodies on piano, gradually builds the intensity, adding interesting counterlines in the left hand as his right hand runs build up more and more. The horns come in for backing as they push into a nice climactic melody phrase with a soaring trumpet line, and then Dominic takes it down softly to the ending. The next one, track 5, The Storyteller in the Forest Clearing. This is a slow and breezy with vocalizations from Andrea Motis. Perez is on guitar, sometimes doubling the vocal melody lines. The melody ends on an unusual low pitch, and then Pastor gets a bass solo. He builds up the tension into the upper range of the instrument. Perez gets a guitar solo following that with a rich reverby tone this time. He builds up the intensity, adding cool double stops and punchy phrasing before floating over the cymbal fills with some rubato phrases as the tune comes to a pause. He then takes it back into time with some pickup notes to a final melody line. And I like how he's altering his guitar tone to match each tune. It kind of blends in well. Track 6, The Witch and Her Creatures. An interesting cycle of syncopated piano chords make the intro here. Soft trumpet and sax lines get added on top, and then a melody of Perez's clean-toned guitar again, and Joan Marti on flute. This is a really nice, lush blend of sound, guitar and flute together. Then, the horns doing something separate to that. The melody builds up into a climax, and Marti gets a flute solo. She leaves enticing gaps of anticipation in there. The rhythm breaks up. Things get a little bit free before a new intense groove starts to form in the cymbals. Marti captures a kind of witchy spirit with the interesting choices of notes she plays next. Perez is next with the edgier, rocky sound as the horns lines swell below and the drums kick up an intense storm. It works back into the melody section with flute and guitar again, kind of at full volume this time, and then comes down for just the cycle of piano chords for a softer ending. Track 7, Strange Road. It's a tight little drum roll on something. It's an interesting little sound there. Kicks it into a funky alternating phrase line in the bass and left hand of the piano over light and tight drums. Caracosa adds a melody line on harmon muted trumpet. Sax joins with harmonized lines and other counterlines. Then they move in unison through the next section. There's a little soft piano interlude, and then Paramon has the lead through the next section, building up tension with rhythmic sax lines. Caracosa gets a muted trumpet solo, next snaking lines over the bouncy bass, and nicely mixed up drumming from Fuster. The tuning gets a little bit out of hand on the trumpet here, as can happen with a harmon mute. Dominic is next with a very punchy rhythmic solo. This is one of those double espresso moments. He just sort of, boom, comes out, and he really hammers on it. Sax and trumpet double up on the last rhythmic section of the melody, and then it comes down soft and dreamy over the original riff with open trumpet. This time he lost the mute, and a little sax for the end. And we're going to finish up with the track 9, Way Home. This one has a slow and flowing piano, bass, and drum intro. Warm trumpet and sax lines join for the melody, and you can feel the 6/8 flow. It suddenly gets surprisingly bluesy and rhythmic for a bit from Dominic's piano, but then it's back to mellow for Caracosa with a warm, trumpet-toned solo. He gets more animated with agitated lines and goes through a little bluesy rant himself. Once again, it comes down for a very soft bass solo from Pastor. He has nice tumbling line ideas, which he repeats, and sketches out some nice melodies on the bass. Dominic follows with more restrained piano solo ideas. He gets more rhythmic, and you can hear some vocalizations along with his playing. Fuster gets the beat going heavier as Dominic builds it up. He's got interesting left-hand things going on, and then he really bursts out, breaking up the rhythms with his lines and building to percussive chords. He continues on as the horns come in blazing for a final climactic line. It then comes down soft for Dominic to finish it off quietly with Pastor's bass softly underneath. And so there's your Forest tour. I thought it was an engaging recording with fresh sounding compositions and arrangements. Keep you entertained with unexpected twists and surprises. Dominic's piano playing is intense and varied in touch and emotions. The other soloists are all good, and we get some tonal variety with different ideas. As I mentioned, Perez's alternating tone styles on guitar. Also, we get the added flute, which makes a nice tonal color there, and Motis's kind of airy vocals. So it's a fun romp through the forest.
I thought the same. I actually enjoyed this a lot more than I thought I would because of the title. I was like, oh, the forest, and all these like kind of new agey sort of titles, like the storyteller in the forest clearing. It's a title that you would expect to hear on one of those old like Windham Hill records, but it's nothing like that. Please, it was a really enjoyable recording, even though it does have this quality of being very positive in its tonality and rhythm. It's sort of uplifting, like he said. I mean, he said, he was kind of like thinking of the freedom in his, during the pandemic, he was trying to recall this musical freedom of being outdoors. So I just felt the record was like, it was positive, it was generous, and with its inviting musical gestures, and it was just really enjoyable and nice, and had enough musical events happening to keep you engaged. It wasn't, very light at all. So just a really good recording all around.
Yeah, really fresh compositions and nice arrangements there. So, check that out. Now we're going to stay in Spain for a little bit more kind of traditional jazz program here. The leader, drummer, Enrique Herreria. And he is from Barcelona, born 1968, and he's got his trio here featuring trumpeter Benet Palais, also, I believe, from Barcelona. So that will be rounding out on bass, Curo Galvez, and on piano, Michel Faber, and Benet Palais on trumpet and flute. Now, you don't get a lot of trumpet players who also play flute. It's a lot of sax players double on it. And two sides, actually, that show a very similar part of his lyrical personality, which we'll get to when I go here. So we're going to start out with jazz standard. Now, that's the other thing that I liked about this recording. There's no original compositions on here, but it's an interesting selection of material, kind of covers of jazz musicians' original tunes that we won't hear other people play usually. So I thought that was kind of interesting. But this one's an old favorite, How Deep is the Ocean? And it starts with a piano intro over repeated high bass note and octaves in the bass. Palais comes in with the melody on trumpet, and he continues on into a solo with a reserved lyrical style. His sound has a delicate honesty to it, reminding one a lot of Chet Baker's playing. Midway through, Herreria kicks up the beat to more of a driving swing, and Palais swings on, connecting his ideas into engaging melodies. Faber is next on piano, playing rhythmically with lots of percussive chords matching the steady swing pulse of Herreria. The drums drop out, and things come down for a bass solo from Galvez. Here's an easy, flowing, and melodic solo. Trumpet and piano then trade eights with Herreria for some drumming focus. He leaves lots of intriguing space in the first break, almost reticent to play and not wanting to show off. Palais takes another round of the melody to finish things off with a few gentle improvisations over the final stretched out chords. Then we've got Emily, movie theme by Johnny Mandel. I think 1964, the Americanization of Emily. It starred Julie Andrews. Kind of pretty melody.
Oh, I didn't see that one.
Anyway, it's a pretty rubato piano intro, joined by bass pulse on mostly high single notes. Herreria adds the waltz feel on cymbals as Palais takes the melody, this time on flute. And he's got a really rich lower register where the melody starts out. He continues on for an improvised solo. This Herreria adds more forward motion to the groove. And he has the same lyrical style on flute as he does on trumpet, always richly melodic playing. Faber follows on piano with the solo climaxing in chiming chords, and then Palais blows another line through the melody. Nice sounding flute here. Then this piece that I really like, Retrato in Branco e Preto, or Portrait in Black and White, as it's known in English, but in Portuguese, it's Portrait in White and Black. And this is a Jobim, Antonio Carlos Jobim tune. And there's a story. It's based on another melody that was from before. And when words were added, I think the black and white were reversed in Portuguese so that the lyrics rhyme. Anyway, this piece is recorded notably by Chet Baker on his Chet Baker in Tokyo album. It's a really beautiful rendition, and I'm assuming Paulo is familiar with that because he has so much Chet Baker influence in his sound, and what comes out in this, almost a tribute to that recording, I felt. It's a piano intro with pretty figures over Herreria's brushes of subdivisions. Paulo is back on trumpet for the melody. Very nice, breathy, and warm tone, handling the odd interval jumps in this interesting melody. It's it kind of has these interesting jumps that build tension. Lots of as I said, that kind of Chet Baker influence in phrasing here. It's a relaxed approach on his trumpet solo with lots of space. Takes his time to build it up. A smooth lyrical ending. Faber follows with a piano solo focusing on a clear touch and some well-articulated tinkling high notes. Once more around the melody by Paulo and a pretty piano ending by Faber to finish it up. This is just a lovely song. Track 4, Dolphin Dance, the old Herbie Hancock tune. Faber makes an interesting intro with running left-hand figures under chords into a swinging melody by Paulo. Galvez has a taut bouncing going on in the bass and changes up to walking on sections of the melody. Paulo has a more animated solo with faster lines on this one, and Faber has a nicely swinging solo on this track with well-punctuated chords. And then kind of the interesting focus of this album, we've got several compositions by Herb Geller, pianist. And these are really nice songs, and I wonder why nobody else seems to record these. First one, Space à la Mode. Another really pretty piano intro here for this lush minor ballad. Paulo's back on flute for the melody, blowing warm, lower register tones, but with some rising flurries now and then. Herreria paints soft brushing textures on the drums underneath. Galvez has a deep and relaxed bass solo. It gets a bit bluesy midway through before a flute solo from Paulo. It's tasty, sometimes vulnerable sounding, just lovely. Weber has a piano solo then with chiming rhythmic chords before they go around the pretty theme once more with a fancy flute ending over the stretched out chords. Another tune that we don't hear that often, Hampton Hawes Sonora. Galvez gets a bossa nova bounce going for the piano intro, and Paulo is back on trumpet for the plaintive minor melody. Herreria keeps the pulse with some delicate brushwork and nice cymbal washes. Faber is up first for a rhythmic solo with a lot of neat triplet ideas. Paulo's solo explores the harmonies with fast tumbling figures and ties back into a final round of the melody. Track 7, another Herb Geller tune, Holiday Cheer. This one's a medium bouncy swing waltz for Paulo to handle on flute. Herreria marks out the feel with delicate cymbal work and little fills. Then Paulo gets some nice triplet figures and flighty runs and fluttering figures in his solo here. Faber has a bouncy piano solo, matching Herreria and Galvez's groove perfectly. And Paulo finishes it off with some tasty flute lines. We're going to get another standard, Kurt Weill's Speak Low, familiar melody to most people. Herreria starts it off with a clicky groove, and Paulo joins in on the famous melody, this time on trumpet. They make a nice break and dash on the swing section of the tune. It's split up from straight to swing, usually done that way, but the contrast is emphasized here. There's another break, and Paulo is energized out of the gate for a swinging solo with lots of motion in his lines. He squeezes out some higher register ideas in this one, has some nicely modulating rhythmic figures too. Faber swings hard on the piano solo with some punctuated driving chords. And here, finally, the leader, Herreria, takes a drum solo. Not flashy, but with tasty ideas before they go through the melody a last time with some final exuberant improvisations from Paulo. And ending it up is an alternate take of Geller's Space à la Mode. It's the same exact arrangement, but the solos are quite different, so it is worth comparing these two, I actually think I prefer the more animated flute solo on this alternate take. So it's mostly a mellow listen, but there are some good swinging moments. It's a nice selection of tunes, especially the Herb Geller and Hampton Hawes originals that I don't think I've heard anyone else play. Extremely lyrical playing from Palais on both trumpet and flute. And Herreria stays in the background mostly with just tasty and subtle drumming. This is a nice one for a relaxing Sunday afternoon or such a time. Just good jazz, played really well.
Yeah, the thing that struck me about this is the same as you. It's the choice of tunes. They were familiar, but not that familiar. Right. You know, and I really enjoyed that. I like it when these things are sort of brought back to my memory. Right. And most of the record it's gentle and it's very appealing. A lot of pleasing sounds in it, and not least the flute. I'm always happy when there's a jazz flute. It's one of those instruments that I like hearing in jazz, and it happens to fit in beautifully in this record with its really gentle mood. I liked hearing Dolphin Dance. That's Herbie Hancock, right? That one is from and the Retrato in Branco e Preto, that the Jobim piece that I really enjoyed as well. But all of this, it was really good. It was but it just kind of low key, so just for I guess a late night album.
Late night. And this is the kind of I wouldn't call it, easy listening. It's just pleasing. You can put this on anytime, even jazz. Someone who's not into jazz will probably enjoy the nice grooves and melodies of this recording.
Yeah. It was sort of special. I liked it.
We're going to end up with, I knew we were going to do, as we said, a from Iberia to Americas idea. So you don't get a lot of South American jazz other than, sort of Latin jazz things. And so when this one popped up, I said, let me check this out. And we're going to go to Chile for this one. Nice. With the piano trio of Camilo Aliaga. And this is his debut recording, and it's also a self-released record, which means, one, it's hard to get a lot of information about the musicians and things, but I got the minimum. And I also think that because it's his own release, he's taken some pretty adventurous license with the programming here. Yeah,
it's kind of you tell them and I'll come in. Okay.
Anyway, he's the son of a drummer and percussionist, and his brother is also a musician. He began playing piano at age of 4, studying with the Suzuki method, and then later went on to study some jazz. And let's see, it says also that he played at the Newport Jazz Festival in 2018. So he's up and coming young pianist, and with him in his trio here, Rodrigo Espinosa on bass and Juan Pablo Jaramillo on drums. And there's a couple of guests on the recording here too, which I'll point out as we go. So we begin with the title track, Ciclos. This one starts with a bass intro of rising and falling intervals that kind of outline a minor mode. Aliaga sprinkles in some mysterious high notes, getting more animated slowly over this minor modal feel. Jaramillo sneaks in gradually with some brushing on drums. After a brief pause, they move into the melody that has little breaks of drums and bass for just the piano to float over on its own. Jaramillo gives it some nice push with nicely subdivided drumming, and Espinosa varies the bass patterns before returning to the intro riff idea for Aliaga to begin soloing over. He builds it up slowly, staying melodic and relaxed, but with a steady left hand of punctuated chords. It reaches a climax of higher, chiming chords. Next, they go around the melody pattern again together. At about 5.5 minutes or so, it transforms into a major kind of mode feeling with alternating chords, and Jaramillo gets some extended drum time, starting with brushes lightly and then working up to heavier stick work. They transition back to the original minor mode thing with the bass pattern, and Aliaga finishes it up with some sparse rhythmic improvisations until the final cadence. Second track, Caminos, I guess it's like pathways or roads. Rhythmic piano intro with a gospel-y melody. Interestingly, there's a layer of organ added with a little Leslie effect, swirling it nicely as bass and drums join in on a slow, steady beat. Aliaga works it up slowly, emphasizing this repeated rhythmic note that keeps building and coming back around. It comes down right before 3 minutes for a solo with a nasty sound that sounds like electric piano mixed with distorted guitar. Must be one of his keyboard tones. But he keeps the organ sound subtly in the background too. It's funky, but even as he works out cool licks, the feel stays relaxed. There's a nice quick return to the original mellow piano intro at just after 5.5 minutes, and they groove it out and end with a bluesy break for piano. Now we're going to get to some of the interesting things.
Here we go.
There's several pieces here that are like keyboard code combinations. And this one is Control plus Z. And actually, these are kind of free compositions, but they're based on something that connects at least the first two. And that is what it starts out with, this swinging unison lick for bass and piano with tight drum fills around it and some heavy dissonant chords that get it started out. The beat dissolves and it gets kind of amorphous with some sparse piano and bass tones picking up the lick pitches from before. Espinosa gets busy on the bass by himself with kind of conversational phrases, like I imagined like someone muttering to themselves. It's kind of like a little self-dialogue going. There's some piano string scratching and unusual percussion with piano chords added underneath his bass. Then Aliaga next rolls out some sustained piano notes and chords into a low rumble, and then agitated runs over more bass rumbling. It sounds like a thunderstorm is coming through. And then Aliaga ends it with a new piano theme over bass and light drum tom rumbles. So a bit of a free-form piece that starts on that kind of unison thing, but explores uncharted places. Track 4, I don't know if this, I don't have any, I assume these other pieces are his originals. This one sounds like it could almost be a pop song. It's called Charlie. It's a slow, it's familiar sounding.
It reminded me like John Sebastian.
Yeah.
You know, welcome back. It had that kind of like piano line. Or if you saw Dog Day Afternoon, the opening theme in that was Amarina by Elton John. It doesn't really sound like Elton John.
Yeah, but it could be a pop
But that
tune.
kind of sound,
It's got a slow and rocky drum beat intro. Piano and bass join in for a few times around the chords, and then Aliaga gets to the pop song-like melody in the middle range of the piano, also adding organ washes behind it. It works into a new section with rhythmic chiming chords and some alternating electric piano-sounding tones that are sort of play offset to what the piano is doing. That breaks into a final solo exposition of the melody theme on the piano, ending on a tasty chord with a little more organ. Then we get another really contrasting piece, Octubre, with Maria Segu on vocals. That's the only vocal piece here. It starts with a slow and rich piano intro. It's very rubato with some kind of more pausing on the last beat of this 6/8 feel that develops with rhythmic left-handed figures. Segu comes in with the breathy and soft vocal that does become more emotional and insistent. Aliaga takes a solo playing very melodic ideas with a very relaxed feel, and then Segu returns for one more verse that ends up with a pretty but unresolved piano chord. So just only piano and vocals here, no bass or drums. And we get our next Control, Control plus Y. This one starts with a soft drum intro, kind of intermittent tom playing. Then Espinosa adds some percussive bass figures, and Aliaga sketches out what I called non-sequitur piano lines in open space. So they don't, each idea is a surprise not connected to what you've just heard, seemingly.
I said that the piano was almost in 12-tone mode at one point. It really sounded like one of those pieces from the mid-20th century.
Yeah, he's purposely moving things around, keeping your ears guessing on the tonal centers. Espinosa works up a walking motion then, and Jaramillo gets some rhythmic ideas on muted cymbals going as Aliaga works an improvised melody on top, reaching a repeated note and some rhythmic chords and two-handed figures that form a pattern, and eventually these link back into that unison bass riff and chords from the previous Control Z. So it's sort of like bookended by that, unison kind of bass figure. So it sort of completes the statement from that first one. Track 7, Deliberado, and this one I'm going to bring in another guest, Felipe Aravena on guitar. It's a slow 6/8 groove, and Aravena joins in together with Aliaga on the melody. There are nice counterlines doubled in the bass and left hand of the piano over the middle section of the tune. Aravena gets a solo, very fluid lines and a dark, ghosty kind of tone on guitar. His phrasing is interesting. It's smooth, but with clearly articulated notes. The groove changes up to a heavier kind of swinging 6/8 for Aliaga's piano solo that has chiming chords, nice little hesitation before some figures. Then Aravena joins back in for some improvisations, working around the piano back into the middle section of the melody with bass counterlines. They take it out on the final section, slowing it down for a nice effect. Track 8, Alzar, and here just piano and Kevin Carvajal on sax, soprano sax, joining in here. It's a rhythmic and happy piano and sax right away, jumps in with this kind of boisterous melody. There's a little pause into a reset for the piano, and then sax gets back in again, working through the many different sections of the melody with some gaps for Aliaga on piano. They take turns soloing over sections, and then Carvajal gets some extended soloing, which he works back into the melody together with the piano eventually. There's a new bouncy rhythmic section after 5.5 minutes that develops for some more sax soloing, and it ends suddenly, leaving you expecting a final note, but you don't get it. And the recording ends with the final piece, Control plus X key combination there. A fade-in on some ringing low piano dissonance and bass figures. Aliaga stretches out a piano theme with pauses between phrases. Espinosa adds some responses on bass, and Jaramillo adds stirring textures on drums. Some sustained atonal piano notes make a new atmosphere for a while, and then bass has some commentary. Aliaga stabs with some muted but ringing piano notes. Things get spacey with some rumblings on bass and some percussion scratching around. Aliaga then brings back in the theme idea, and it gels with the bass for some kind of unified motion to the end. So it's an adventurous mix of different things for a debut recording, especially in the freeform control pieces. The guests add even more variety to the trio. I like the mix of rhythmic feels and grooves. There's a general sense of space and relaxedness in Aliaga's playing that's nice. And I liked the subtle little different touches of the organ and other keyboard electric sounds too. Kind of adventurous for a debut recording, but it's interesting.
Yeah, I kind of found this album to be sort of a mixed bag. I felt like the three experimental tracks, the Control plus XYZ ones, kind of broke the mood of the other compositions, which were all pretty mellow and enjoyable, really. Yeah. It was an odd way to end the album on an experimental track. You're sort of left in the middle of the universe somewhere with no way home.
Right.
Anyway, the piano playing throughout this album was really characterful. I liked it. And most of it's on the mellow side, but quite a few changes of character throughout. I think of this, you said this was his first album?
Yeah.
This is a debut?
Yeah.
Yeah, it kind of feels like a calling card album. Like, this is what I can do, sort of thing. So, you've got this, and then I can do all these weird experimental things too. So, you know, good for him for that. I mean, we talked about this with Jasmine Horn's first album, too.
But I get the feeling like if you got signed on a big record label, that the producer would not let you do this kind of program.
Well, not these days, right?
Yeah.
I think in the 1960s when you know, anything you did was okay, you know. We're really in a different age now, although you never know. We could be moving back to that.
Could be. But, you know, when you have something like this, self-release, you know, can end up with more interesting and daring kind of things, you know, right out of the gate.
I think it's good to have daring things on your first album. You know, it's kind of,
you
know, it kind of shows like, hey, you know, I can step out of the box.
So I think he shows a nice sense of adventure here. And even with the free pieces, like I said, they are tied around some kind of structure and you know, gives you something to latch onto there. And very interesting. And our first album from Chile. So, yeah, I want to hear what's going on around the world.
I don't think... Well, it depends if you count, like, Melissa Aldana. She's Chilean,
that's
too.
right.
But she's in New York now.
Yeah, we did.
So we did that one.
Yeah, so, I want to get some more, you know, South American jazz artists into the mix from time to time. So, keeping things as international as possible.
Yeah, well, our trip to... the Iberian Peninsula and the Latin America was pretty brief. You know, we think we're just hitting the 2-hour mark right about now. Yeah. Not a bad thing, really. I don't know. I feel like, you know.
Anyway, it was interesting. Be sure to check out all of these recordings. I think you'll be... Most of the music is uplifting, rhythmic, and a lot of good melodies in here, too, both in classical and jazz.
Yeah, a lot of new music to discover this week, certainly for me. Next week, our trip around the world is kind of coming to an end. We're just going to do something rather ordinary, right?
Well, I'm going to go with the heavy hitters next week. The American heavy hitters. And what I've tried to do is find lots of new artists and go international a lot of the time. But there's just some really big things that from the U.S. in jazz that have come out, and we got to get. One of them is we both know about, and it's time to get to that. And then there's a couple other things too. So I think our next stop is Italy again in a couple of weeks, right?
I think we're going to go back to Italy, of course. Right, we have a load of Italian music, both in classical and jazz. And I want to say I have a whole like American programs worth of American classical music too, but I don't want to do it yet because of the. I want to do the William Bolcom album by Marc-Andre Hamelin, which I really love, but it's the complete piano rags of William Bolcom, and you know, this is our last week of classes. I just want to wait till that's over so I could, because I don't think I can listen to like an entire 2 CD set of piano rags in a single day. I think it's got to break that up, space them out.
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, it's great playing and they're great performances, but they're a little too much of the same thing to listen to like all the way through at one sitting. You know, so I think I want to break that one up, and I'm not sure I can do that this week. If I have like a symphony to listen to, I can just do that sitting down one time. So I think I'm gonna. I have some odds and ends I'm gonna tie up next week. We have a new Renitsky recording that we haven't talked about. It was out for a few months now. The first one without our friend Daniel Bernardson's direct involvement in, too, which is kind of interesting. I'm looking forward to it, see what they do.
It's time to hear some new Renitsky, too, and catch up on some other things as the summer goes on. I have a feeling that, as usual, the new releases, they're already starting to trickle down, taper off a bit.
Yeah,
so
that's okay. I got a backlog. I don't really, I'm not going to have a problem filling out the summer. Also, we have... The Gramophone Awards are going to come up soon, and they're already talking about gramophones like Orchestra of the Year, so I've been kind of listening to some of those recent recordings, and they're pretty spectacular. Great recordings.
Oh, good.
Yeah. There's the, I'll name the Pittsburgh Symphony Orchestra, conducted by Manfred Honeck. They recently put out a Beethoven Symphony 6 album that's got an absolutely terrifying fourth storm movement. So...
Sounds good.
Yeah, you could give that a listen. It's not a apparently. I haven't heard the whole thing yet. Just I heard like the highlights, but it's apparently not a recording for purists.
Oh, okay. Sounds interesting.
I'm not. I think I'm more of a purist than not, but I can step out of the box there. It's just that I just want to have that recording somewhere of the purest version of the work that I can go back to, and then I'll listen to anything.
Yeah. And I mean, why keep recording all these things if you're not going to try something.
Yeah, I know, right?
A little bit different,
yeah.
right?
I think the point is with music like that too. You don't want to get too far away from, if someone does this really weird adventurous interpretation, then somebody else tries to outdo that, then pretty soon you're just out.
You get out of control.
You're just so far away from the tradition that you don't really. That's the thing. I don't like seeing that happen, but I'm happy to hear just oddball performances and stuff like that.
All right. Well, I think August might be a month to look back on some things we just haven't gotten to yet, and
there's plenty of good stuff too. Yeah. It's like
anyway, check your after you hear this episode, in the same day that list for next week will be up on Deezer and Facebook. So if you haven't checked us out there, do that. You can start listening to the music as we are during the week, and get to episode 73 next week. And I think before next episode, we're going to hit 10,000 downloads.
Oh, really? Yeah. This week,
I believe so. I believe before the next episode.
We'll get a certificate for that. We'll have to put that up on the Facebook site.
Yeah. So thanks to all the listeners who keep listening to us. And that's just the start.
I think that's our last certificate. I don't think Podbean gives you anything.
Probably not.
That.
No.
Well, maybe money.
Well, we'll see how it goes.
That would be cool.
So until next week, please keep listening. Thanks as always to Fast Signs of Staten Island for our glowing neon logo. And come check us out on Facebook if you haven't yet. Drop us a message, get in touch by email, and we'll have that new listening list up tomorrow. And then we'll see you again next week for episode 73.